It's hard to ask people to contemplate that an idiot all the way up to an authoritarian ruler or politician possesses basic goodness. It's difficult for me. Then I think, okay, they have people who love them back. They experience moments of genuine open-heartedness with those individuals. There's certain moments where they actually are connected to basic goodness. Could they come back to them?
In this episode of Insights at the Edge, my guest is Lodro Rinzler, a Buddhist meditation teacher, a father, and the author of 7 books, including the international bestseller, The Buddha Walks into a Bar. He's the founder of the Basic Goodness Collective, which is an online meditation community, and he's the author of a new book, You Are Good, You Are Enough, Free Yourself from the Trap of Doubt and Return to Basic Goodness. Lodro, welcome.
Thanks for having me. It is always a delight to hang out with you, Tami. And I always just feel a little bit more like relaxed and at ease in your presence, which is so fun.
Oh, what a kind thing to say. All right, I learned that you started meditating when you were just 6, and you were raised in a family where your parents were meditators. So, okay, little kid imitating their parents. That didn't really blow my mind. But what did was that you started teaching meditation when you were just 18 years old. And I wanted to begin by asking you, what inside of you, what in the core of you drew you to, we could say, the Dharma, to the teachings of the Buddha, to meditation? What was so resonant inside you that at such a young age you said, this is it, this is what I want, this is what I'm going to do?
Yeah, I always love talking with you because these questions always sort of stop my mind for a second. As you noted, I was raised in a household that was Buddhist. So I was raised within this container where the concept of this new book, You Are Good, You Are Enough, was really drilled into me from a young age of basic goodness, that I was basically good, whole, complete as is, which, I think you're right. It's not unusual that a kid would then say, oh, my parents meditate, I can meditate, and they might imitate that their parents to some degree. But I think the thing that was infused in me that was really helpful at that time was the idea that I was basically good. Meaning that I wasn't a bad kid if something went wrong. It's just something went wrong, I made a mistake, and it didn't negate that I'm okay, that I'm good. So when I was 17, I always say this very dramatically that I ran off to the monastery. I basically spent a summer where I shaved my head.
You can be dramatic with me, that's
Thank
fine.
you. Yeah, I shaved my head, I took the robes, I went all in. But it was a temporary ordination. It was always going to be a temporary ordination. And I was doing this walking meditation inside, but they had these great large windows, wall to wall. And there's this moment, I remember it so clearly, a whale broke up through the sea and then came crashing back down. And similarly, as I said before, it stopped my mind. And I realized, oh, my parents had never done this. They had never experienced what I was experiencing. My path had diverged from their path. This was now mine. This was my thing. So I was 17 at that time and went off to college, and I said, all I want to do is study this thing. It was just sort of an initial young person inspiration. And the way I did it is I threw myself into religious studies. I did as many retreats as I could. And at a certain point, I started a little meditation group on campus and imported a bunch of teachers from the surrounding area. Can you lead practice? And I think they just got frustrated with the commute, and they're like, you have done all the prerequisites for an initial teacher training. Go do it. And you do this. You are in the trenches with these other 18 to 22-year-olds. We are not. You know what it's like to be there. Go talk to them at your level. And I learned how to teach meditation. I did it very poorly for a few years. I don't think I was great at it. But I did really just try and hold as much space as possible for people. And it felt like this was something that I feel like sometimes people are like, oh, this was a calling or something like that. I wouldn't go that far, but I think that this was something that I knew was helping people, even if I didn't always get it right. Just by creating the spaces where people could show up and meditate, I said, this is helping people. All I want to do as a 18-year-old at Wesleyan University is help people and help this world. Maybe this is the way I go about it. And I just sort of fell in love with the path from there.
What's interesting is this desire even to be helpful, or this longing, or I don't know what you want to call it. That in and of itself, not all teenagers identify as a core motivating force in their lives. I think that's powerful, Lodro.
Yeah, thank you. I think I was in good company. I served throughout Wesleyan University. At one point, there was that whole movie that spoofed it called PCU, which was really like everyone and their mom had a cause at Wesleyan, and everyone had an idea of how to help. And that was my early years of like protest arrests and things like that too. I was finding my way in terms of how I wanted to help the world. But I realized that one way that really did help and bring about peace is a sense of people working with their mind. And I knew it brought me peace. So I doubled down on practice and study and then ultimately teaching as much as I could.
Okay, you mentioned that in your family, your parents treated you with a spirit of, you're good, you're enough. I want to talk about when our parents have their own shame, their own sense of not being sufficient inside of themselves, and how that's the water we swim in when we're in the womb, when we're born. You can tell I'm asking for a friend, Lodro. But anyway, what I'm getting at is, even if we were told, it's fine that you didn't get such a great grade, or this is fine, and the words were given, we knew that they didn't think they were okay. And we picked up on that, and that became our internalized norm.
I'm with you. And to be clear, it's not like my parents were, got all A's in that regard. There are messages that were shared with me about things that were their own biases, we'll say. Either you can't go into that sort of career, you'll never make money, or you can't be that sort of person because no one will like you, which is actually a really big one. Or I think the way they put it is life would be harder, you know? And it was well intentioned often, but it was not them representing, oh, you're basically good, you're basic. But it was in the water enough that I internalized it. As a parent myself at this point, I am so sensitive to this because my daughter's 3 and there's no way I'm going to get this right. I just almost have to like say, I'm going to show up as authentically and meet her in the moment as best I can, put down my phone every time she's in the room and just be there with her and meet her where she is. And it's been a delight, but I am consciously like, I need to pass on this message of basic goodness. And it also means that I have to work with my own relationship with it. It feels like there's an urgency, I'll say, in terms of. I remember when my wife was pregnant, sitting there for a minute and saying, "Wow, there's almost like a primal need to get my life together." I'm like, "Well, we have a house, we have a backyard for this kid, we're okay, we're stable. What do I even refer to?" And it was the sense of like, I have to get my mind right. I have to like really work with my own mind so that I don't pass down some of my negative habitual tendencies to this next generation. It felt urgent for that matter. So I can't speak to my parents and their occasional reifying things other than basic goodness, but I can say for myself, it's something I'm very conscious of. And I think, I think you're right that some parents have that thought of, I need to really work with my mind in order not to pass some things on. And some parents maybe not, they're not thinking about that as much.
The new book that you've written has these 3 different sections, 3 arcs: seeing the goodness in ourselves, seeing the goodness in others, and seeing it in society. And we'll start and keep going here with this seeing the goodness in ourselves, because I think the biggest obstacle, is this sense of shame, and a feeling of that shame being very deep and below the surface. whether it's body shame or shame about being different or the shame from a previous generation that we feel still lives in us. So I want to know how, here you are, you're saying this urgent commitment. I don't want to be living with this kind of shame and pass it down to my newborn and now my young daughter. How have you worked it out? How have you worked out your own shame?
Continuously. That's the short answer. Um, I'm with you. I think, I swear I'll answer your question directly. But what came up for me as you were opening this was this moment where my friend Neil approached me and he said, he as a gay man, he grew up afraid of what people would think about him if they knew who he really was. I think that's not uncommon, and it doesn't just have to be within the specific circumstance. I think many of us have that thought. But by virtue of being attracted to men, there's societal messaging that taught him maybe there's something broken inside. And ultimately, Neil overcame that messaging and came out. But the reason he brought this up to me is because it was years later when he attended some teachings and he heard me talk about basic goodness. He was stunned. He said, I don't think I ever heard anything like it. He said, is this how people are moving through the world, with the sense that like they're fundamentally worthy, just inherently deserving, not having to engage with all of the shame and blame? He realized that he'd been okay all along, and that the problem wasn't him. He didn't need to be fixed, that he was always, by virtue of being who he is, he's been whole and complete as is. Now, I mentioned Neil to start because I think that's something that's resonant with a lot of people. And again, it's not necessarily, oh, I'm gay and there's societal messaging saying that, there's something wrong. It could be any number of things. As you said, it could be body, it could be disability, it could be any number of things. For me personally, I feel like it's looking at so many aspects of my own mind and where I'm holding stories that are just no longer serving me, and starting to admit that they are not serving me, that they're only causing me problems. And I do think that the bummer of our whole capitalistic system is built around this basic confusion about our sense of enoughness. Like, we're told that this lie that we are not enough, and thus we need something external to us to make us whole. It could be the cosmetics industry, the diet industry. It could even be some areas of the wellness industry. Companies make money off the idea that you're basically messed up, and if you come to us, we have something that can fix you. And if we actually woke up one day and said, that's not true, all of those industries would fall into the ocean. So for me, even though I also was bombarded by media, ad, social conditioning that told me that I'm not enough, that I need to strive more. And it could be to get into a better school, to get the right job, to get financially secure, ... But I realized that this is, coming from the Buddhist teachings, that's samsara, that constant striving for, well, when I get to do X, Y, and Z, or I look this way, or I get to, that accolade, then I'm enough. And I've been on both sides. I've gotten the accolades. There's this moment when, I started this network of meditation studios, Mindful, at one point, and I had grown up with my parents reading the New York Times. And I said, oh man, how cool would it be to be in the New York Times someday? And then we were. And there's this wonderful photo and this great write-up above the fold. And then some people came and learned how to meditate, and then they walked away. And then it happened again, like a month and a half later. And we were in the Times in various ways. My book, me, the studios, 6 times in about 6 months. And honestly, it didn't do anything for me. It was nice the first time. I said, oh, wow, sort of check that thing. And I was like, but this doesn't change anything about me. It doesn't make me feel whole, complete as is. As we were joking before we started recording, it's like, well, what's the next thing? That's what we do. We go, what's the next thing then? I just want to get more butts in seats. How do I do that? I want more people to learn how to meditate. And when I looked at that intention, I said, oh, then it's more about how I show up personally. So I'm being a bit circuitous here, but I think a lot of the societal messaging that we receive is that we need to strive to become something else. And it's me actively, every day, working with those thoughts that come up in my head, the thoughts of what we might call the trap of doubt. Will anyone even want to read this book? Will anyone care? That sort of thing. All the way up to you know, as you said, more like rigid things around shame, mistakes. There are whole chapters in this book about shame and guilt, mistakes, villainization, all of these sorts of things that we do often in the comfort of our own mind and how they're not necessarily serving us. So it's been a lot of work for me personally, and it's not done. I think if we were done with those stories of what I refer to in the book as the trap of doubt, that insidious little voice that says you're not enough, you're not doing enough, you need to get more. If we were actually done with that, then we'd be enlightened. So it's sort of a constant thing of looking and continuing to examine what stories am I telling myself that are not serving me, but are actually causing harm.
How do you work with your own mind when you see this achiever self or, I just published this book. I want it to, reach X numbers of people. And if it doesn't, I won't feel like, quote unquote, enough. I wasn't on enough podcasts.
Right.
Not enough people listen to Insights at the Edge, that's for sure.
Right. That's exactly it. And that's the thing. There, even if you came up with a magic number of the perfect number of listeners and you hit it, you'd probably say, okay, so now what? Sharon Salzberg actually has a great story of she doesn't mind that I share it. I've asked in the past. She was somewhat envious of a number of friends who made it to the New York Times bestseller list. And she said, oh, I've never done that. And then finally, one day it happened. She gets this email from her publisher. And it says, hey, congratulations, here's this week's list. And it was all of the books by that publisher who had made it that week. They sort of copied and pasted it into one thing and shipped it around. And there, I think it was Faith, maybe I'm wrong. It hit that. And then right below it, looking on my shelf as if I know this book, but it was the What to Expect When You're Expecting book, which has been around. It's been a classic for a bazillion years. It was right above or below her. And it said Sharon Salzberg, Faith, 1 week on the list. And then it was What to Expect When You're Expecting. Forgive me, author, for forgetting your name. And it was like 180 weeks. And she goes, oh. So she got the thing and then immediately goes, but I don't have 180 weeks. So for me, I think it's been a really interesting journey because the first book, The Buddha Walks into a Bar, I remember sitting there on publication day. And this is the thing, as you well know, that no one ever tells authors, which is publication day is incredibly boring. No one's popping champagne and tipping their hat in your name. You're sitting on the couch saying, okay, so now what? Should I go see if it's in a bookstore? Sort of like that. So I was sitting there, I said, well, what do I want out of The Buddha Walks into a Bar? And I came up with this elaborate fantasy that someone would read it. It was meant for, I was in my 20s at the time. It was meant for people in their 20s. And maybe that person read it and started meditating and they kept meditating, and it doesn't matter what job they were doing, but they started to really incorporate the principles and let it shape their life, and maybe they'd live a more compassionate life and wield that influence in a really good way. I said, that's enough. And then, as you said, I've done a number of books since, and a lot of times, because that book did so well, I think, well, I want to hit that, or I want to hit this number, or with that number. And I've come full circle with You Are Good, You Are Enough, where it's like, if I remember sitting there on publication day saying, if one person reads this and it actually helps them wake up to their basic goodness and they actually start seeing basic goodness not just in themselves, but in the people around them, the people they like, the people they don't like, the people they don't know, that's enough for me. So
Really?
I set the bar at one person.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
I really felt
really?
that.
Really?
Yeah.
Really? Really?
I would never come on your show and lie to you, Tami. And
Thank you.
that weekend, someone emailed me and I was like, done. Everything on top of this is gravy. And I really do believe that. Like, if I never write a book again and like there's a publisher that's like, you sold a miserable amount of copies, don't do this again, don't come back. It's okay. I've done some books. But there's someone out there being helped by this. It's on it. And again, it took me a long time to get back to that. It's enough for me now.
Okay, there's a lot that I want to talk to you about seeing the goodness in others and seeing the goodness in society. But before we do that, I want to just talk about the words basic goodness, because they're extraordinarily meaningful to me. The word goodness is extraordinarily meaningful to me. But I notice whenever I start to talk about it, it can get very abstract very quickly. And I feel like I'm in some kind of philosophical debate about good and evil and stuff. And I'm like, I don't want to go there. I want to get here in the beginning of our conversation, if we can, into the essential feeling the experiential sense of our innate goodness. And I thought you actually did a brilliant way of helping the reader get there when, towards the end of the book, you talked about the color blue and how blue was not a color that was in our human vocabulary. I didn't know this, so I'm now sharing what you shared in the book previous to 4,500 years ago. So maybe you could share that and how that helps us, if you will, try to feel into what basic goodness is under the language.
Yeah, this is my favorite story too, where I'll start by just saying basic. Let's say basic. Let's take that word. Basic, if you do not like that word, it could be fundamental, it could be primordial, innate, inherent. It's part of who we are. Basic, and like the foundation of my house is basic to the house, right? It has that, everything's built on top. So that is part of who we are. Goodness is not that good versus bad dichotomy that we often think of. It's not that Star Wars level of good versus evil. It's a sense of wholeness, completeness, goodness as is. That is our birthright. That is a basic human experience. It is not a Buddhist thing. It's so interesting because I have been meeting so many different people. Oh, I'm not really interested in Buddhism. Cool. You don't have to be a Buddhist to understand that you're basically good. In fact, if you come from some Christian backgrounds, it might actually be really helpful to you to realize that you're not basically sin, that you are basically good. And that might help to some degree. In any case, I think that this is just an experience that any human being can have. And I, as a meditation teacher, admit that when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. As a meditation teacher, I'm like, meditation helps with everything, but it really helps us understand this experience of basic goodness. When I'm meditating and I notice I drift off, I acknowledge the thoughts, I come back, there might be a moment when there's just some space and I'm relaxed in my body and I say, oh, this is okay. And then I might say, wait, is this basic goodness? And then I second guess it, and then I'm off to the races again. But in that moment, that was it. If you've ever had that experience in meditation, that is it. It is ordinary, but it is profound at the same time. It's ordinary because it's so simple. When I got back from the gym this morning and I got into the shower and the warm water hit my back, my muscles relaxed, I experienced a moment of basic goodness. When my daughter hugs me at the end of the night, she says, big hug, and then we have Disney World rules that I've employed in my relationship with my wife and my daughter. The mascots at Disney, apparently, they are not allowed to let go of the hug first, which I think is so sweet. That's like, you never know how much a child might need that hug, so you let the child disengage first. And so I started doing that. So my daughter could hold me for, 2 minutes, and then she says, I'm ready, and then she lets go. And that's 2 minutes of basic goodness. If I'm 100% there, I'm not thinking, oh no, I'm going to run late for this meeting. I'm just there, cool. Then it's basic goodness. But to get to your point about blue, there's this story. Jules Davidoff is a professor, who went to Namibia and worked with the Himba tribe. And there are certain things about the tribe that he found unique. One was that they, as you noted, didn't have a relationship to the color blue in the way that you and I do. So what he did is he got a piece of paper and put 12 squares on them. 11 of them were green and one was very distinctly blue. And he showed them to many members of the tribe and said, what do you think? What's the difference here? And they would say, I don't know what you're talking about. They're all the same to me. And he said, he posited that the only reason that he or you and I might be able to see blue in that, and the Himba tribe might not, is because we've been introduced to blue. And at the moment I heard that story some years ago, I was like, I need to go take my daughter outside and point at the sky and tell her it's blue. I was like, has anyone introduced my daughter to blue yet? So that's very common, that we have to introduce our next generation to certain concepts. That's the point of this book. The point of the book is to point out the experience of basic goodness in the way that I just did around meditation, the shower, hugging a child, so that people might then start to see it in themselves. That's number one with a bullet. And then, as you noted, then they might recognize the basic goodness of other people. And what is society if not us plus other people? That's it. So the idea of starting to recognize basic goodness, having it pointed out to us, that's what the point of the book is.
Just to go into the words basic goodness just a little bit more, I notice when I use words like sufficiency, deep okayness, wholeness, connection, satiation. There's other words, and I'm just brailing around here. They give me the feeling, and they don't create the same kind of good and evil, good and bad thing. And I'm just curious what you think about that.
I agree with it. I think so. This is a term that is ubiquitous in particularly Buddhist circles today. It was originally coined by Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche in the early 1970s, and he used the term Done Sangwa from Tibetan. If you look, you will not find that term in traditional Tibetan Buddhist texts. He pulled these two words together and said, basic goodness. I'm going to use that term to describe this awakened state of mind. And it works. He had a real knack for finding ways to make these sometimes esoteric principles incredibly accessible to us Westerners. And I think that sense of basic goodness, when you say it, as you noted, it's hard to not understand what we're talking about. But I think some of the other terms as well are equally good. It's sort of, if the Buddha taught 84,000 skillful means, I think as many terms as possible to point to the fact that we're, as I say in the title alone, that we're good, that we're whole, that we're enough. I'm all for any of them, frankly.
Okay, so the first section of the book, Seeing the Goodness in Ourselves, to be honest with you, I, as challenging as I find that to do consistently in my life, I didn't find it anywhere near as challenging as I felt when I got to section 2 and section 3. So when we get into seeing the goodness in others, I thought, okay, what really trips me up here? And I thought, well, the first thing is, I just judge other people like they're idiots. Like that's an idiotic thing to think or say or do. And I wonder if we can just start there. When other people are behaving like idiots, I'm sorry, just to be like, just cut right through it, how do we see the goodness in them? They're not even hurting me personally. It's just like, what? Say what?
Yeah. I love this. Refraining from throwing anyone under the bus, but I have a loved one who really loves to be judgmental, frankly. It's sort of like a fun hobby. Like, why is that person doing that? That is really dumb. And, I think we can almost have a sense of humor about this to some degree. I think it's when we get really solidified in that person's doing something wrong and they're bad and evil that it becomes really harmful to ourselves. And we can go all the way to your neighbor who, is mowing the lawn wrong or whatever it is, all the way up to, there's a chapter in here, what about that world-threatening politician? Because you have to acknowledge it. And as someone who's been teaching at this point for 25 years, the number of times someone has raised their hand and said, okay, basic goodness, fine, but what about ... And it's often a world-threatening politician. So I have many ways of considering this. One would be from an overview perspective. If we're saying, I'm basically good, you're basically good, everyone is basically good, that's our nature, that doesn't negate that there is confusion. That someone could be confused about their basic nature, that they can act out of ways that they think are going to bring them happiness, but are ultimately harming themselves and others. So when I talk to people about it, I say, have you ever done that? And they said, yes. I also have done that. I am always very honest about it. Like, there are times in my life where I have fallen off the cushion, where I was deeply entangled in grief, sadness, drank too much, you name it, and caused harm to myself and others. Now, that doesn't negate that I'm basically good. It just means that I was really distant from it at that time. And I can acknowledge that. And I can learn from that, which is also a very important human quality. Now, can I look at that idiot from that perspective too? that this is someone who is suffering, who's having a hard time, who's, again, trying to make themselves happy in many times the most temporary ways, and causing themselves and others further pain. Yes. And then when we get to that world-threatening politician, it's like these people are incredibly distant from their basic goodness. They're acting from a place of hate, that there's hate in their heart, and that is incredibly hard. So I'm going to go somewhere, and if you want to edit it out, I'm not going to blame you because it's triggering. The original chapter heading of What About That World-Threatening Politician is What About Hitler? Can we go there?
We can go there because, as you said, this conversation necessitates that we go all the way to that extreme. And if it's not Hitler, it's Trump.
Yeah.
It's another world-threatening politician.
Putin
So
was
yes, we
thrown
have to
in.
go there.
Yeah. And if people hate that we're talking about Trump, for example, other people in a different room probably would say, what about Biden to me? But more often than not, it came up Trump, if I'm being honest, in the last several years. So the idea, to go all the way to the extreme of Hitler, that this is someone who didn't emerge from the womb hating people. He learned that type of thinking over time. And that hate distanced him from any semblance of basic goodness. So maybe an idiot, the neighbor who's mowing their lawn wrong, that level of confusion is very different than what we're talking about. But in this case, the consequences were catastrophic. I've lost entire branches of my family tree as a result of this. So it's hard to ask people to contemplate that an idiot all the way up to an authoritarian ruler or politician possesses basic goodness. It's difficult for me. I acknowledge that. But then I think, okay, they have people who love them back. They experience moments of genuine open-heartedness with those individuals. There's certain moments where they actually are connected to basic goodness. Could they come back to that? And there's a story that I rarely share, but I'll share it here, and I'll try to be brief. When I was touring for The Buddha Walks Into a Bar, this question came up. And someone asked, what about Hitler? And I gave some version of what I just said to the group that night. And afterwards, a woman was telling me a story. She married a man who had kids. She had kids from a previous marriage. They merged their families. And one of her stepsons fell in with the wrong crowd and was doing a lot of drugs and did an unthinkable crime. Someone ended up dead. I'm not going to talk about it. It's very bad. And went to jail. And she, at that moment, said, well, F basic goodness. Like, that's not a thing. Like, this kid, this is an evil act. I was wrong about this concept. But because she was close with him at one point, she continued to show up and visit with him every month. And a couple of months in, he asked about the family dog. And she noticed a slight softening in the conversation that ensued. And then, a couple of months later, he asked if she could bring him art supplies because he used to love painting. And she noticed, without the drugs, without the influence of these people, he started to come back to who he was before. And she said, I know basic goodness is real because I've seen it in the worst of situations. And I always think about that one because we can get very distant from our basic goodness, and then we can also come back. There's no one that's irredeemable in that way, which is not to condone or excuse anyone's negative actions, but to say that they are still human, that they are still basically good. If no one else, it helps us. It helps us think from that perspective. It doesn't behoove us to have like this little icebox around the heart of, we'll use Trump. Trump doesn't care what I think of him. He doesn't. If I spend all day thinking negative thoughts about Trump, it hurts no one but me. Which is not to say I'm going to be Pollyanna and think only positive things about him, but I'm going to direct my mental energy towards ways that can help this world that are not just focused on that.
In the book, you offer this practice that you can actually have a photograph of someone you have a really hard time with, I presume including world-threatening politicians. You could have a photo and practice loving kindness. And you say you don't necessarily have to keep it by your bedside or on your desk, but someplace. And I thought to myself, I wonder if I'll do that. I don't think I will, but I am curious about if you've actually done that practice yourself.
That's a good question. I have to some degree. It's always an easier person for me. It's like a friend that I've fallen out with or something. I haven't talked to them for some years, or I felt blown off by them in some way. There's actually a situation where that happened, and I would. So the practice. I'll just say what the practice is very briefly. I learned this first from Pema Chodron. You take this photo, you put it somewhere in your home or your wallet where you'll see it semi-regularly. And when you see that photo, you pause and you make a loving kindness aspiration. May you be happy. May you feel safe. Something that feels genuine to you. I've had many meditation students work with this, and I could tell those stories, but you asked me about mine. So it's a friend who, particularly in my early 30s, just didn't show up in a way that a friend would. That's all. And would often make plans and then break them last minute and not call and not do anything. And at a certain point, I was like, okay, enough with this person. But I put the photo out at a certain point, and I said, I haven't thought about this person for a while. Let me just wish them well. And then at some point, I sort of went through that process. I felt maybe a little softer. I said, I'm done with this. I can put it away. And then 2 years later, he reached out. And he was in recovery. He is in recovery. And said, listen, I wanted to talk to you because I really wasn't a good friend to you back then. I don't think you knew how much I was drinking, what was going on with me. I was hiding it constantly. He wasn't like, oh, I blame you. He was like, no, you just didn't know. But that's why I wasn't there for you. It's because I was struggling with my own stuff then. And I'm in recovery now. It took me a while to get here, but I wanted to catch up. And I was 1,000% receptive, maybe because I'd been actually setting aside those resentments before I even got on the line with him. It's possible. Or it could just be the other 1,000 Buddhist practices I'm doing. But I really do think it's helpful to soften our heart towards the people that we're holding resentment for in the comfort of our own home. Because again, it's that icebox thing. We're just defreezing that enough that, we feel more liberation. Even if we never talked to that person again. I could have never talked to him again and still felt a little better about the relationship.
And as I was reading You Are Good, You Are Enough, in the second section about seeing the goodness in others, I have to say I did notice this softening. I thought of all the people that I've put in enemy camp over the years for various reasons, some more so, some not really that much. And, I did feel this softening that you're describing, especially when you talked about never give up on anyone. And I thought, I gave up on that person. I gave up on that person. I thought, what could I entertain that idea?
Yeah, I love that. And this is not me. None of this is me. This is wisdom that has been passed down to me through various traditions. But the one quote that I just sort of pulled up here comes from Representative John Lewis, who obviously is a Christian. And before he passed away, he was on Krista Tippett's On Being. And he said this amazing thing about the work that he was doing in the early civil rights era. He said, we from time to time would discuss if you see someone attacking you, beating you, spitting on you, you have to think of that person. Years ago, that person was an innocent child, innocent little baby. So what happened? Something go wrong? Did the environment, did someone teach that person to hate, to abuse others? So you try to appeal to the goodness of every human being, and you don't give up. You never give up on anyone. And I thought that was so profound coming from him, who literally was beaten, attacked, and was still able to rise to the occasion of, you learned this. This isn't who you are. That is such a lesson in basic goodness.
Now, you said that even previously, before you wrote You Are Good, You Are Enough, people would raise their hand and ask you the question, well, what about Hitler? What about this psychopathic whatever person that they know in their life? Okay. And I thought to myself, if we were really to sort of boil this down, and I'm curious what you think about this, and this came from a conversation I was having with my wife this morning about your book, and she actually offered this thinking. She said, look, there are two camps of people. You can boil it down. In one camp, they say from the core of reality, there's good and there's evil, and they both exist, and they're these equal forces in the universe. Camp over there. Now, in this other camp over this other side, we have this basic good okayness, and then there's some kind of occlusion, some kind of reaction to pain, trauma that's distorting it. And that's another group, and that's another way of looking at the world. And you're not going to convince people, Tami, of one way or the other, but at least you could point out these two different ways of seeing the world. So first of all, I'm curious what you think about that,
I
Lodro.
think that's probably pretty accurate. And I think that there's one version of that that's going to cause an individual more pain than another. I think that version of those people over there on that side of the aisle are wrong and bad and worth hating is, again, just going to cause us pain when we hold that view. If we look at the view of they're basically good and they're acting in ways that are contradictory to what they want to accomplish, that's a different point of view. And again, we're not excusing the activities. It's just saying, okay, but they're confused. It's a slight point of view that is different than what we normally see. And it is. I mean, that's the whole point of this book, right? Like I'm trying to point out this basic goodness thing so people have a lived experience of it. And that if there is quote unquote converting to be had, it's that they feel, oh, I have faith and trust in my own basic goodness and I can start recognizing it in others more. Maybe I can give up some of those thoughts about those people are just bad, wrong, etc.
One more point here about seeing the goodness in others that I really liked. You were talking about it in the context of if you're having an argument or a debate or a conflict with your partner, you can be a scientist and not a lawyer. And I thought, Tami, take note of that because I come from a family of lawyers and I can often start making my case. And I noticed the scientist takes a very different view of trying to understand. So I thought this was an excellent point, Lodro.
Yeah, well, thank you. And credit where credit is due. That is very much introduced to me through my wife, Adriana Limbach, who wrote a book for Sounds True, Tea and Cake with Demons. It's a running joke in the household that my wife never listens to any of these things. And so I can come on and just tell everyone how brilliant and wonderful she is. She'll never know. And yeah, so the framework that she introduced to me is looking at something as a lawyer rather than a scientist. A lawyer approach, you go about your day looking for ways to prop up your idea about something. You build a case for that idea. If there's anything that contradicts the case that you're building, you do not include it in your vision, And the scientist says, I'm going to approach what's going on with fresh eyes and a curious mind. I'm going to look at what is happening right now. And if something contradictory to my hypothesis is there, I'm going to take that into account and just start to see things clearly. And I think that's what we want to do. We want to see things clearly, not live in a story bubble of our own making.
All right, the third part of the book, seeing the goodness in society. When I first looked through the table of contents, I thought, what? Really? I mean, patriarchal society. Where's the goodness?
Yeah.
Lodro, make your scientific exploration here, if not your legal case.
Yes, right. I'll make my case for this. So I'm with you. Society, it feels even worse than when I started this book. I started this book 3 years ago. I mean, you know how long the tail of publishing is. And it feels like things are more on fire than they were before, that things feel more divisive than they were before. I'm not being Pollyanna. This isn't a Pollyanna book. That's not who I am. And yet, I'm making the case that society is basically good. And I alluded to this a moment ago, which is if I can say I'm basically good and you're basically good, and a lot of other people I like are basically good, and then all of those people I don't like that we just talked about, they're basically good but confused. They're basically good. And then there's all those people that we don't know, which is the vast majority of everyone. The people in the grocery store, the people halfway across the world that I read about in the news, they're basically good. Then that means that society is basically good. We think society is some massive thing out there that we are not a part of. It's dictated in Washington, D.C. or elsewhere. Society is this right now. And I mean, I want to give praise where praise is due, that you're an incredible community builder. You are. And what you have built over these many years is incredible. Even within the context of we're doing a podcast, this is a society. It's the podcast society. It's you and me, and then whoever is listening to this, maybe not as many people as you want, but I think it's great. And the people then hopefully walk away from our conversation, they feel uplifted. They say, oh, this thing, basic goodness. And then someone cuts them off in traffic while they're listening. And they say, okay, I'm frustrated, but that person's basically good and they're just a jerk. Like I can soften a little bit more toward the other people in my life. And it's a little bit like throwing the stone in a pool of water. We don't know where the ripples will go. You and I think we're just having a conversation, but it has this massive effect on whoever is listening. And then they go and they have a massive effect on everyone that they interact with. They get to work and they bring some thoughts, feelings, reflections, experience of basic goodness into their work society. They go home and that's their family society. So we have so many societies. I just named two that I'm part of. I have you mentioned earlier, the Basic Goodness Collective, which is, where I gather with people and I teach meditation, this online community. There's my home society, my wife, my daughter, our two dogs. We had fish. Don't ask about them. They just unfortunately went down overnight, and so we're down half a society. But I also have my gym society, the people I see at my gym that I was there earlier today. That some of them I've known for many years. I have so many different. My friend group. We all have these mini societies that make up a larger society. And the Buddhist notion of interdependence is again an experience. It's not like a philosophy or a dogma. It's just when we show up authentically, we impact people one way. When we show up lost in our own head or full of anger, we show up and impact them differently. So we're constantly having this drop by drop effect on society. So I think to imagine society not as something out there, but something that we're constantly co-creating through all of our mini societies can be very powerful and also embolden us to know that we are creating positive social change in a world that often feels like it's on fire.
And maybe this is obvious, but I think it's important to say, which is that whether we're talking about individuals or we're talking about societal norms, if there's something that is harming other people as an aspect of a society, naming that is important. Even at the same time, we can recognize how we can bring our own good hearts to help make a shift in the societies that we have impact on. We still have, many times, in my life at least, a responsibility to name something that we see as harmful.
There's a story in the book that comes to mind, and maybe you already know where I'm going with this, which is The Parrot and the Forest Fire. It's one of those Jataka tales about a past life of the Buddha. It doesn't necessarily matter that it's the past life of the Buddha, but he was a parrot. And the forest where the parrot lived caught fire, and the flame spread, and he had wings, or she had wings, I believe. In this case, it was a she. And so she flew off for a second, and then she heard all of the cries of the animals in the forest, and she said, I've got to go back. What she did, she started swooping into the nearby river, picking up a few drops of water and shaking it onto the forest fire, which obviously was not really doing anything, and she was getting burned herself. I hate to go to the sort of esoteric side of things, but the way story goes that there is the God realm. There's these divine beings. They're watching the parrot, and then the king of this realm, Indra, says, "I got to go check this guy out. I've got to see what's going on with this parrot." So Indra flies down in the form of a mighty eagle, and he says, "What are you doing? You're not really making much of a difference. You're about to get burnt alive. Get out of here." And the parrot, undeterred, she replied, "You're a much bigger bird than I am. I don't need your advice. I need your help." And it said that Indra was so moved by the courage and conviction of this bird that he began to cry, and his divine tears fell and extinguished the forest fire and saved the animals, and also fell on the parrot, and the parrot herself became more beautiful as a result. All these bright colors began to sprout up on her feathers. So I love the story because it's what did the parrot do? The parrot didn't single-handedly put out the fire. The parrot named the issue. He said, this is something that's going on, and I'm going to try and show up and help in my small way. And even if it hurts me at times, I'm going to do that. And then that magnetized others, in this case, very powerful individual. But, I think when we look at this, when we say others, community, people coming up and saying, oh, I can help with that too. And ultimately, our small actions joined together make a massive impact. And I was doing an event in New York City recently, and a dear friend, Erica Phillips, was talking about how Thich Nhat Hanh famously said that the next Buddha would be Sangha, would be community. And I think the power of community during this time is really amazing. Here we have Indra swooping in and saying, I'm going to help you. But really, it's all of us. I don't think we should look to a savior, an individual savior. I think we have to say it's all up to all of us to band together and help. And yeah, we can start by just saying, there's a forest that's on fire. I'm going to do my best. I'm going to name the thing. And I'm going to hopefully inspire and talk to people enough that they are moved to help with that.
In this third section, where you're writing about seeing the goodness in society, I want to tell you the moment that I found the most refreshing. And it was when you were quoting Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, and you said, taking the attitude that the phenomenal world is sacred is the first and last practice of all. I'd never heard that quote before. I'd heard of Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche's teachings on the sacred world and viewing the world as sacred, but the first and last practice of all. So suddenly, because I was sitting there thinking about society, but suddenly I was like, oh, Tami, remember, everything you see and experience is sacred. How does that shift you? So that's what I'd like to know from you, Lodro. How does that shift you when you take that perspective?
Yeah, this book, it has, as you noted with the loving kindness photo, a lot of like, here's things you can do. But really, it's a book about a shift in view. The view from I'm not enough, I'm not doing enough. If people knew X, Y, and Z about me, they wouldn't want to hang out with me, date me, hire me, whatever. Two, I'm basically good. I'm basically whole. I have the resources to show up and make a difference in this world. Now, that applied to society is actually pretty huge. To start to view the world around me not as basically messed up, but a bunch of basically good people who, could be helped a little bit to sort of realize that a little bit more, to sort of put down their aggression, to put down some of these divisive things. And I think that it's just as the shift in view brings about more hope in a time that feels somewhat hopeless. I think we need to have a larger view about where we are as a society, and that there have been dark times before in societies, and that we've emerged from them. And I know people might say, but we didn't have nuclear weapons in the same way. We didn't have this particular person in power or any of it. But ultimately, we're still here, and we're still, the whole thing of, the arc of justice, arc of time bending towards justice, it has this quality of, it doesn't feel great right now. I know that. I know society doesn't feel good. But to hold the view of basic goodness, that there are so many of us individually who are trying to help, who are trying to live through the lens of enoughness and help one another, I think that's, at least, again, from the comfort of our own home, a nicer way to hold and approach the world.
Okay, but just to dig in a little bit more, because I still haven't quite heard what I think I'm trying to understand through your eyes, is when you consider the first and last practice, seeing the world as sacred, and you see all of the polycrisis in front of us, genocide, etc., the climate crisis, we could go on and on. How does the sacred view work in you? I mean, you've talked about seeing the goodness in people, individual people underneath it, but how do you see even this passage that we're in as humans, as potentially a sacred passage at this time as a species?
Yeah, so as you noted, there's chapters in this book around relating to the phenomenal world, relating to our environment, relating to nature. And as you asked that question, I glanced out my window and I looked at this tree that has been alive for longer than I have and will be there, barring any massive disaster, longer than I will be here. And I think of a teacher I greatly admire, who I have studied with before his passing, Dr. Larry Ward. And he shared a story at one point that one of the first things he did in the morning is that he would go to his backyard and he would just put his hands on this tree. And he would just make this connection. And he's someone who I think really mastered this sense of connection to sacred world. And of course, Dr. Ward really had, he was not shy about talking about some of our societal problems. I'll put it that way. He was phenomenal at addressing them. And he still held this sacred view. So I always think of him when I look out at some of these trees in my backyard and how I don't actually spend enough time just putting my hands on them. I do it at times. Personally, you asked about my personal practices around this. I go out there and I will follow his lead because he asked us students to do it and just put my hands on them. The other day I climbed one of them to show my daughter that you could do such a thing. And in that moment, there was basic. And society felt like that it was just the two of us in that moment. And it was, because that was our experience. This is not to negate the world being on fire, not to negate, as you said, the polycrisis, but sometimes we need reminders and strengthening of the sacred view, of the sense of enoughness, of basic goodness, of our own enlightened potential, is really, if we're going to go to the deep end of the pool. That's what we need in order to fortify us to address what's going on in the world. So I don't know if I'm answering your question directly or not. You tell me.
I think you are.
Okay.
And as a note to end on, I wonder if here you could exercise your meditation teacher chops and take us into an experience of, if possible, of touching basic goodness in our own experience right now, some way that we can access this.
Yeah, I bet, and this goes back to the pointing at the color of blue, I bet that there might have been moments where someone listening to this might have just intuitively grokked it, and it's already happened. But I'm happy to lead us in just a few minutes of meditation, and it's not an esoteric practice. It is mindfulness meditation, but I'm just going to see if we can relax into that experience through being here present with our body breathing. So if you're at home, you can just place your feet firmly on the ground or sit with your legs loosely crossed. Maybe even just take a breath and start to relax down through those sits bones, through those feet or legs, to actually make that same connection with the earth as a tree does, to root down. So if you want to even take a few breaths to do that, you could, with each out-breath sinking in deeper. From that strong base, we lift up through the top of the head, elongating the spine. But allow the muscles to relax, so let the shoulders hang down. If you want to place your hands on your thighs, you can. The head can rest, the top of the head with our chin slightly tucked in, relaxing the muscles in the face around the forehead, the cheeks, the jaw. If this means that the jaw hangs open, that's fine. And just notice the natural rhythm of the breath. We don't have to change it in any way now. Just feel it. The nose, the mouth, the belly, wherever you find it best. Just feel it and rest your attention there. If you get distracted, that's fine. You can just silently say, thinking, just to acknowledge that you drifted off. come back to the breath. And as we rest, is there some experience of basic goodness? Is there some sense of I'm okay in this moment? And again, it can feel very ordinary, or maybe there's some clarity. But just rest. Just allow yourself to be here 100%. Okay, so we can conclude the meditation in whatever way feels right, maybe moving the body a little, having a sip of water. But hopefully, coming out of that, there's some experience. Again, not like a philosophical understanding, but like an experience of, oh, in that moment, there was basic goodness. If not, that's also okay. It will come. But I think even just basic mindfulness meditation can really help reveal it.
I've been speaking with Lodro Rinzler, the founder of the Basic Goodness Collective, and he's the author of the new book, You Are Good, You Are Enough. Lodro, thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me.
Being right here, being in society together. I like it.
I always like hanging out with you, so thanks for having me.